Chapter 3. Foreboding rooted Sarah in place. She glanced back at the others hovering at the top of the basement steps. Bruce and Nadine exchanged worried glances, while Phil struggled to hold onto the handrail, wincing in pain, but stubbornly determined to stand with the group. They didn't know her brother. If indeed it was him, though the voice was definitely his. He was from a life before VF had taken proper hold and changed their world, so no one else in the house knew him. She steeled herself, pulled up her mask, and unlocked the door, opening it just a crack to peer out. A tall figure stood on the step, rain streaming from his coat and hat. "John?" She kept the door ajar with her weight behind it in case she had to slam it shut. It was her brother. He gave her a weary smile. His voice barely rose above the clatter of the rain. "Hey sis, got room for one more?" Sarah's impulse was to reach out, to bring him into the sanctuary of her home. Oh, how she'd missed him! Yet the memory of their last encounter and the ever-looming threat of the virus anchored her in place. "Not here, not at the front door," she said. "Around the back, there's an isolation space in the shed at the bottom of the garden. We have to be careful. You know that." John's smile wavered. The old resentments from their previous wrangling rose again, dulling her joy. Did he think they should waive all their protocols just because it was him and he didn't believe in them? But, to her relief, he accepted it without arguing. "Yes, of course. Sarah, it's good to see you," he said, his voice trailing off as he turned to trudge around to the designated entry for potential disease carriers. Sarah watched him go. Relief, dread, and a fierce longing for the past, when they could embrace without fear, held her still for a moment. She shook it off, shut and bolted the door, and prepared herself to face whatever it was that John was bringing to her doorstep, be it peace or peril. "It's my brother, John. I'm going to meet him in the airlock," she said to her housemates as she disappeared down the corridor to the kitchen and the back door. She didn't offer reassurance, because truthfully, she couldn't. Not yet. John might be a help, but also he might be trouble. She unlocked the back door and stepped out into the rain, pulling up the hood of her coat. The airlock stood at the end of the garden, an old brick potting shed, reinforced and repurposed. The bigger side was for the possibly infected, the smaller for the healthy. A sealed barrier of reclaimed plexiglass and plywood divided the shed into two airtight compartments. Every crack had been sealed with rubberized tape. A salvaged landline phone, wired between the two halves, let them speak without risk. No shared air, no contact, just visibility and voice. Sarah entered her side and shut the door behind her to keep the night and the rain out. Condensation bloomed on the plexiglass between them. On the other side, John sat on a folding chair, hunched in his coat, staring at her. She picked up the receiver from the wall mount. A second later, his voice crackled through. "Hello?" She didn't speak at once. Seeing him again stirred up more than she'd expected. Hope, resentment, guilt, and that old ache of unfinished business. "You're on a closed line," she said eventually. "Whatever you've come to say, no one else will hear." When he said nothing, but continued to gaze at her as if he couldn't get enough of the sight of her, she said, "I wasn't expecting to see you here. Ever." Sarah still remembered the pain on Fliss's face the day before she killed herself, and the way John's name felt like searing bile in her throat for months after their vitriolic parting. "Yeah, well, things have changed. I was wrong about some stuff, and I'm sorry. I was really hoping we could start over." Sarah studied his haggard face. He seemed sincere. Was this a genuine olive branch? A chance to mend bridges? She wished she could hug him. What had he meant when he said, "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you"? But she looked at him again and said, "We'll talk later. Right now, you look dead on your feet. I'll bring you out a meal. Then you can get a good night's sleep, and we'll talk in the morning." He merely nodded, as if it was almost too much work to even do that. "First though, John, have you led others to this house?" The shock on his face convinced her more than his words. "No, of course not. Okay, I'll be back shortly with food." With John settled for the night, Sarah turned her attention to Phil. He was back in his camp bed, his face pale and drawn, but he propped himself up against the wall when Sarah entered the basement. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for coming back for me." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You'd have done the same for me. You need to rest now. Yell if you need anything." He nodded, eyes already drifting shut. Sarah watched him for a moment. Then she headed upstairs to rejoin the others. She found Nadine and Bruce deep in hushed conversation at the table. They broke off when Sarah entered, watching her expectantly. She sighed. "I know it's risky, him showing up like this after so long. But he is my brother, and I have to help him. He must do his fortnight in the airlock, but then I hope you'll let him stay in the house if that's what he needs." Bruce and Nadine exchanged glances. "We understand," Bruce said finally. "But we're more concerned about trust. We'll all need to be cautious until we know we can trust him." Sarah nodded. Fair enough. She knew proving John's loyalty would take time. "For now, let's try to get some rest," Nadine suggested. Sarah agreed. It had been a long and trying night. As she bid them good night and trudged upstairs, she felt the weight of exhaustion setting in. But despite her fatigue, she knew sleep would be elusive. Her mind was too full of questions about John's sudden return and what it might mean for their precarious community. And with the worry of his return came the memory of the night when she and John had fallen out so badly. She'd been sitting in the darkness, Felicity's favourite sweater clutched in her hands. A faded scent still clung to it, transporting her back to happier times when her sister would prance around in it, not a care in the world. Felicity had always been the sibling that carried the light with her, carried the light and the magic and the joy of life. But now she was gone, buried in an unconsecrated grave. She'd killed herself to escape the suffering chronic VF had inflicted upon her. Hot, itchy tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. She knew who was responsible for infecting Felicity. She'd always known who'd murdered her sister. The company that had employed her cared nothing for their employees' safety, willfully exposing them to the virus in the name of profit. And they had got away with it, just as they did every day as the working poor of the city suffered and died. And their highly ambitious brother, John, worked for that company and wouldn't hear anything against it. By the time Fliss took her own life, Sarah's grief had curdled into rage. She'd already done her mourning, one slow day at a time, while watching her sister deteriorate. She swore she would have her vengeance against those who took her sister. One way or another, she would not rest until the whole company no longer existed. Sarah had begun to wonder if they exposed their employees on purpose for some experimental reason too. That night, the night of Fliss's funeral, John had hurried around to this house where his sisters lived. "How are you holding up?" he'd asked, his face etched with concern. She noticed his eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. "As well as can be expected," she replied, stumbling over the words. John stepped inside and embraced her. "I'm so sorry about Felicity. She was too young to die." Sarah nodded, a fresh wave of grief hitting her. They sat in solemn silence for a time before she finally spoke again. "It wasn't an accident, John, or some random infection. They did this to her on purpose." John's brow furrowed in confusion. "Who did? What are you talking about?" "The company. They deliberately exposed Felicity and others to VF as some sick experiment. I just know it." "Now hold on," John said, alarm creeping into his voice. "That's quite an accusation. How can you be so certain of this?" Her anger erupted again, overtaking the grief. "I'm damned sure of it. Why else would so many young, healthy employees come down with VF? The company, your company, that you won't hear a word against, wanted to see its long-term effects. They wanted to find out the difference between people who go on to have chronic VF and those who don't." She leapt up and paced back and forth. "Well, now they know the answer to one of those queries. It drives you slowly mad with pain at the loss of your energy, the loss of your motivation, until you see death as a mercy." John stood too, raising his hands placatingly. "Sarah, please think about this. You're distraught, looking for someone to blame." "I don't need to think about it," Sarah shouted. "I know what those monsters did, and I'll see them burn for it if it's the last thing I do." "Keep your voice down," John urged. "You're talking madness. VF spreads on its own without anyone orchestrating it. People don't wash their hands nearly enough." Sarah whirled on him. "Wash their hands, you utter moron. It's airborne, and you know it, and your company knows it. You just don't want to accept responsibility. How can you still be so blind to what's happening? They've got you nicely conditioned to accept their lies. That's going too far, John said, anger creeping into his own voice now. Be reasonable, Sarah. What you're suggesting just isn't possible. Reasonable? Sarah spat. I buried my sister today, but sure, let's be reasonable. Maybe if we ask reasonably, they'll hand over those responsible for murdering her. Felicity took her own life, John shot back. As tragic as that is, raving about murder and revenge won't bring her back. Maybe you feel guilty for not stopping her from killing herself. Sarah had literally trembled with fury. Get out! I can't even look at you right now. Sarah, please. I said get out! Roughly, she shoved John away. With a pained look, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. Alone again, Sarah sank to the floor with her head in her hands. She was so angry, so grief-stricken, that she didn't know what to do with herself. But she knew one thing. There would be justice for what had been done to Felicity. She would see the company burn, even if she had to light the first torch herself. They had taken the person she loved most in the world. And now, because of them, she and her other sibling were estranged. Between triplets, there was no middle ground, only love or hate. The one she loved was gone, and that loss had turned her love for the other into something bitter and sharp. She hated him now. The company would be made to pay for the destruction they'd wrought on so many lives, as well as her own. But that was then. This was now. John was back in her life, apparently wanting to make peace. She had to give him a chance. Didn't she? She had automatically let him back into her life because he was her brother. Nevertheless, she wasn't sure that she trusted him, although she wanted to so much. There was also the possibility that he might endanger the others in the house. Sarah rose early the next morning, despite tossing and turning all night. She padded down to the kitchen in her slippers and robe, wrapped in the silence of a house not yet awake. She made 2 mugs of coffee, one black, one with a teaspoon of dried milk, just in case he still took it that way. Although, of course, it used to be oat milk. But such sophistications were long gone. In the airlock, John greeted her with a tired smile, standing on his side of the partition, hair sticking up, looking as if his night had been as bad as hers. Sarah opened her side of a narrow, double-doored box, the pass-through hatch built into the divider wall, and slid in his mug, sealing it again. It was another precaution against infection. Only one door could be opened at a time. She heard a soft clunk as John opened his side. You remembered I take it white, he said. I can't think when I last had white coffee. No milk. Where did you get milk? You got a secret cow hiding in this garden somewhere? I gave you a teeny-tiny spoonful from our teeny-tiny store of dried milk, Sarah said. And I appreciate it a lot, John said. The look of gratitude on his face told Sarah he meant for far more than the teeny-tiny spoonful of dried milk. She didn't know what to say, and an uneasy silence hung between them that stretched out too long for comfort. Finally, Sarah spoke. How are you feeling this morning? A bit better, I think. Sarah studied her brother. He looked worn. He had horribly dark circles under his eyes that no doubt mirrored those under her own. That's good, she said. You're still in there for a fortnight, though. House rules. Another stretch of awkward silence followed before John cleared his throat. Sarah, we should talk. Properly this time, without shouting. And if I'm in here for 2 weeks, we have plenty of time. Sarah tensed, clutching her mug tighter. Go on then, she said warily. If you want to start now, or do you want to leave it for a bit? John took a deep breath. Might as well go for it. After all, while I'm stuck in here, I'm a bit protected from your wrath, aren't I? And his smile was so wretched, Sarah nearly cried at his effort at levity. He hurried on, which was just as well as she couldn't have spoken coherently at that point if she'd tried. I've been thinking a lot over the last few years since Felicity died. About Felicity, and about the company, and I think maybe you were right all along. Sarah blinked, but remained silent. When Felicity first got sick, I just believed she got infected like others get infected, usually by not washing their hands enough. He ignored the contemptuous snort that escaped Sarah before she could help herself. I didn't want to believe it was anything more than an accident. I convinced myself the company would never intentionally infect its staff. But now... He trailed off, staring into his coffee. Now you don't think it was an accident? Sarah finished. John shook his head. No, I don't. He looked up at her, grief aging his face. Marie got sick too. Sarah sucked in a sharp breath. She hadn't known John's wife had contracted VF. It started in the usual way, cough, vomiting, dizziness, all that. Then it became chronic VF. Then it got even worse. Became something the doctors had never seen before, or so they said. She suffered, Sarah. So much. His voice broke on the words. Sarah put her hand up to the screen. He did the same on his side. I'm so sorry, John, she said. I had no idea. His mouth stretched in a grimace. It was as if a silent wail left him before he could speak again. It went on too long. It became too much for her. She lost everything, all her energy, her joy, her looks, her hair, her hobbies, her friends. She ended things a month ago. Oh, John. Sarah and Marie had never taken to each other. They'd always been polite, though. But of course, after the siblings had fallen out, there'd been no contact at all. But Sarah hurt on her brother's behalf, even as her suspicions about the company were confirmed. I think you're right that the company infected her intentionally, John continued. Her and Fliss and God knows how many others. I was blind to it before, but I see the truth now. Sarah asked him, What convinced you? John's face tightened. Sarah half expected his jaw to creak as he spoke. After Marie died, I did some digging, internal memos, hidden reports. The company was experimenting on VF mutations, engineering new strains. They used their own employees as guinea pigs and recorded the effects. His hands curled into fists. There's a fortune in vaccines. The more variants, the more profit. But to keep the money flowing, they needed fresh strains. So they created one, the one that killed my wife. For research, for profit. They're monsters. This was exactly as Sarah had always thought. Who buys the vaccines, though? I mean, there are none to be had for the general population. Exactly so. The rich protect themselves at all costs. We have to make this right, John, she said. Fliss, Marie, all the others, we have to get justice for them. He nodded. I want to see the company pay for what they've done. I'll do whatever it takes. His eyes met hers. For once, they were in complete agreement. Sarah went back into the house for more coffee. She and her brother spoke long into the morning, trying to work out how they could gather more evidence and build a case to expose the company's crimes. Or at least, John talked of building a case, but Sarah couldn't see how that was going to do anything in today's freeloader society, where the company had control of everything, including the media and the so-called justice system. It was all very well having evidence, but there was no one in authority who would care. But she didn't argue. She just kept her thoughts to herself as to what should happen when they had enough evidence to prove to everyone what the company was up to. The next time she went back to the house, Nadine went out to the airlock to examine John as much as she could, given the restrictions. She wanted to make sure he wasn't suffering anything they could do something about. When she reported back, she said, He's running a slight fever, but he's already in the right place in isolation, and I've given him some Rexavirin. We're getting very low on that, by the way. He's a bit battered and bruised and thin, but otherwise seems healthy. As far as I can tell through the glass. He's exhausted, but that's understandable too. What's the plan, Sarah? Bruce asked. We have few resources. Are you expecting John to stay after his fortnight in the airlock? I don't know what he's hoping for, Sarah said. We haven't discussed anything past this isolation fortnight, but if he did want to stay, then I would like him to. We'll have to discuss it with the others when they get back from their foraging expedition, Nadine said. Of course. And, if they're in agreement, we will manage, Bruce said gruffly. His tone was guarded, but not unkind. Sarah gave him a grateful look. She knew it would take time before the others fully trusted John. She wasn't sure she fully trusted him herself. Sarah returned to the airlock just after dawn the next day. The garden was silvered with thick dew, and the air chilled her skin. The shed was dark. As she stepped into her side of the structure and shut the door behind her, the emergency lantern clicked on, casting a weak amber glow. She picked up the phone. As if he hadn't moved all night, John was already there, sitting hunched in his coat, elbows on his knees, looking like he hadn't slept. He lifted the receiver as she settled into the chair opposite him. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. He gave a weary shake of his head. They sat in silence a moment, then John cleared his throat. You remember when I said you'd taken something that didn't belong to you? I do remember that, and I still don't know what you meant by it. I wasn't talking about gear, or food, or shelter. Then what did you mean? Stop with the riddles. It's too early, and I've not had enough coffee. He didn't smile. I meant Phil. Sarah stiffened. Phil, he's just a guy I met who helped me get medication for a sick friend. She wasn't going to tell John that she and Phil had a longer history than that. They went back to pre-VF times, but it was no one's business but theirs. You went back for him, John said slowly, but you didn't know what you were bringing with you. A cold sense of menace suddenly cloaked her. What did he mean? And how did he know she'd gone back for Phil? When I was still inside the company, before I walked out, I had access to restricted data, not just public sector, not even just military crossover, stuff the board marked level black. He paused. That's where I found him. Sarah said nothing. Phil wasn't just a chemist, he was Subject A01, first in line for a program that tracked long-term effects of VF mutations in controlled hosts. They engineered new strains in response to his immunity profile. He's an immuner. I already knew that, Sarah said. So yes, he's bound to be of interest. Yes, he's also a non-carrier, one of only about 30 in the country. That's why they used him. He doesn't know what they did to him. They dosed him, monitored him, ran him through neurological and hormonal mapping without consent. And then one day, he vanished. He told me he was a chemist. But he never said anything about all that monitoring. Of course he didn't. He didn't know. No one told the subjects. It was all without their consent. Phil didn't know he was a massive experiment, a test case. Sarah's thoughts spiraled. Of course, it was possible. Governments, corporations, they always denied it until it was too late. But history was littered with examples of covert experiments on the general population. They've been trying to recover him ever since. John continued. That patrol officer at the dock, he spotted Phil, recognized him, started tracking him. That's why I intervened. Sarah stared. You followed us? I followed him. I followed you. Because I knew if they caught him first, none of you would be alive now. Did you kill the patrol officer? John didn't answer. They'll come again, he said. Once they find out where Phil ended up. You think your protocols will protect you? He gave a bitter laugh. Sarah clamped her hands around the edges of her seat, the weight of it all crushing in, threatening her ability to breathe. We're just trying to stay alive, she said. We're not soldiers. We're not even activists. John's stare didn't waver. Then you shouldn't have stolen their most valuable experimental asset. They'll want him back, Sarah, and if they can't have him, they'll make sure no one else has him either.